It's a great honor to be joined today by Dr. Lixing Sun. He is a distinguished research professor of biology at Central Washington University and author of The Fairness Instinct, as well as most recently, The Liars of Nature and the Nature of Liars. Lixing, welcome to the Nature and Nurture podcast.
Well, thank you, Adam, for your invitation. It's a great opportunity to have some time to talk about my book.
Thank you for joining us and for writing this excellent and fascinating book. You are talking about lying and deception, which I think typically we think of these very human things, right? But you give a bunch of excellent examples, even on the cover of the book here. This is an insect that's like masquerading as a leaf, right? So this is a natural form of deception.
Yeah, exactly. That's the from Brazil. It's the leaf mimicking katydid. Yeah. And
Yeah.
even the little broken piece is well mimicked.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is an excellent example of deception, and you don't really require any real intelligence for deception, I guess. Even little insects are doing it. And you introduce in the book two laws of lying and deception, and you make a useful distinction between those two types. Can we talk about what that distinction is?
Yeah, it's tongue in cheek. Yeah, when people talk about deception, lying, cheating, people often use them interchangeably, but actually they are different. Lying refers to the communicating false information. During communication, if I tell you something false, I'm lying. I said, well, when he asked, well, how are you? I said, no, I'm terrible. I'm very, very well today. I feel happy, but I just don't tell you. I'm lying. But deception is different. Deception is that another individual does not matter. The same species or different species. They use the weakness of your cognitive system and then fool you. So it's not communication.
But that's what this guy is doing.
Exactly. That's mimic is a very typical deception. It's not lying. So it's basically to fool a predator's vision, so that to escape from being eaten. So that's deception. So lying and deception
it's escaping. Sometimes it's like
two different biological processes or psychological processes, if you like.
And then if we want to keep branching this decision tree, within deception, there's the sort of deception that's like, I'm harmless, or I'm not what you actually want to eat, like I'm just a leaf. And then there's the other types with the poisonous frogs, or even the non-poisonous frogs that evolve these bright colors that generally signal poison. And they're just deceiving you into thinking that they put all their evolutionary points into that perk, so to speak.
Absolutely. We call it a Müllerian mimicry. Müllerian mimicry means the poisonous species tend to converge together. So they send out a warning signal. You eat me, you die. So that is the kind of signal some other potentially, especially, for example, like birds would get the message.
And I guess there's this sort of equilibrium that has to happen, because you would think it's costly for, let's say, a poisonous animal to evolve or produce the poison, right? So to the extent that it can get away with it, it's going to be incentivized to only have the color but not the actual poison. But then if too many species start doing that, then the color is meaningless, right? So there's a stable percent of the population that can get away with deceiving, and beyond that, it starts to fail?
Absolutely. This is sometimes called the Bayesian mimicry, and named after the British naturalist Henry Bates. Bayesian mimicry means an edible species mimic something really menacing, toxic, but in fact it is not. Or sometimes they mimic the objects, such as leaves or kind of plant sticks, for example, stick insects. These are called Bayesian mimicry.
And these doesn't have to be conscious, right? Like you can be engaging in this sort of deception without really having even any concept of deception at all as the humans speak of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Mostly actually it's unconscious, definitely. It's an adaptation.
Then would you say that lying, as opposed to deception, where deception is exploiting these sensory biases or weaknesses on the part of other animals, and lying is actively creating falsehood, is that something that you need to have? Where does that emerge on the evolutionary ladder? How complex do you have to be to engage in lying?
Oh, lying, I believe, should be should have evolved from communication. People tell lies, for example, and
Mhm.
animals do the same thing during the communication. So that's lying. And deception is broader. It does not matter within the same species or within different species. The one I just showed you, the the sensitive plant, actually is a deception. They pretend to be dead so that the potential herbivores, especially the grasshoppers, will not like to eat them. Grasshoppers
Mhm.
like fresh food, but when they see a dying plant, they will not eat it. So that is
Mhm.
a deception.
You had another great example from a personal story in your book about duck hunting.
Oh, that was a real good one. Yeah, that was my first encounter with a duck that pretend to have a broken pretend to have a broken wing. And local people were pretty poor in the area I was working for my master's. So that day, the guy by the name of Lau, I talked about him by the name of Lau. He was only 18 years old, but he was my occasional field assistant. But the other day, it was quite late, around 5, 6 o'clock in the summer, and then he saw a mallard trailed by 6 ducklings. He said, "Listen, come here, come here, come here. we found a small ducks. They call small ducks ducklings. So he took me with a small boat, and we quickly caught them up. And then on the shore, the mallard or the mama mallard, the female mallard, quickly hid everybody, and the small ducklings were also hiding. And then when we were searching for them, and then he found, wow, Lishi, take a look here. I see that duck has a broken wing, and he cannot fly. So he began to chase that one, and
Instantly losing all interest in the
yeah,
ducklings,
that
going after the
totally
big meat.
lost the focus. I kicked the grass around. I found a small duckling, but I did not tell him. So he began to be distracted by the female mallard, and then female mallard was just about 2 yards away from him, and then suddenly took off. Suddenly took off. And then he came back empty-handed, and he was kicking around here and there, and did not find anything. So
This hints at
the mom,
extreme
yeah,
intelligence in the mother duck because she's assuming that if she pretends to be injured, you're going to go after her and not the ducklings. And
absolutely, yeah.
now, again, to get to the question of consciousness in lying, do you think that she actually knows enough, like it's intelligent enough to think that, or is this something that can happen instinctually, unconsciously?
That's a great question. I think I would leave it to you, psychologists, to work on that.
Yeah.
But we would like to assume that that kind of behavior potentially is partially built in, and partially adjusted during the development. I mean, so many duck, not only ducks, but killdeer. These are the shorebirds. And I also found some species of quails also do that.
Mhm.
So when you see a behavior that is widely spread, just in many different species, and really they are distantly related. And these behavior typically share a common ancestor long time ago. So I do
Mhm.
believe there got to be genetic basis, but I will not say the nature or nurture, but it got to
Uh-huh.
be some kind of adaptation. It's both. It's nature and a nurture. I
And
think
that's usually
some
where
of them
that
are
ends up.
better, yeah, are better at that.
It's really amazing in either direction, whichever one it is, because either birds are much smarter than we realize, or the things that can happen unconsciously and genetically programmed instinctual behavior are much more complex than we realize.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I talked about the ings there. I talked about the great cuckoo. If you remember, the great cuckoo, when they try to parasitize on the magpie's nest, so the magpies are quite big bird and they would fight against them. So the great cuckoos would do is sending the male to distract them. The male and female magpies out of their nest, and the female cuckoo would sneak into their nest and lay an egg. So it's sort of a play Bonnie and Clyde.
Uh-huh. There's an incredible diversity of species that you talk about in your book, and you eventually build up to humans and talking about the unique forms deception takes in humans. But first, I want to ask you about your own biological research background, because normally people become experts on a single species, right? But you have so much diversity here.
Yeah, that's my evolution of my research. I mean, being in a small school, we are always underfunded. Although we have many ideas, it's just underfunding that limits our capacity to pursue some bigger questions. So I sort of skipping around, sometimes working with other people. Sometimes, I actually got quite a bit from Chinese government to do basic research. So I worked with a lot of species from tree frogs, which is local, fairly easy. During, for example, a break, and then we can just go out and do some study. And that is about tree frog camouflage. I showed you the picture. So we have one species of tree, the Pacific tree frog, that shows two morphs, one the gray morph, the other green morph. So we try to understand how they evolve and how they adapt to different environments. And then later on, I worked on, my PhD was about the beaver chemical communication, which also I mentioned in the book about a kin recognition and prevention of these extra-pair copulation. The way they can actually tell from each other that prevents especially females from engaging in extra-pair copulation, because the males could sniff out.
What is it like switching research from frogs to beavers? How much is the same, and what did you have to learn or relearn?
It's totally have to relearn whenever I start a new project. Have to learn everything about it. So I spent about nearly 20 years on beaver, and then briefly on frog. And then I realized there was a paper published in Science in the 1970s claiming that there are two pairs of alleles on two loci to control the tree frog's coloration, the color morphs. Turned out to be it is far more complex. I thought I got a perfect model to pursue in my lifetime. But 4 or 5 years down the line, we found the mechanism was far more complex. So we had to give it up. But although we published a few good papers as well. But then I went back to working on chemical communication in rodents. I talked a lot in my book about rodents, and then on pandas as well for the chemical communication. And eventually, about 20 years ago, I began to explore the possibility to study the monkeys, the Tibetan macaque. So that has been my transition.
And are you still working?
Monkey is my ultimate goal. I try to see sort of like seeing human basic instinct and how they are related to a typical monkey, for example.
Mm-hmm. How much are you actually interacting with animals at this stage in your career?
A lot, still a lot. As long as we have more ideas, many creative ideas, we just don't have enough students to work on them.
That's excellent, because I know in some fields of academia, the model is something like the higher up you go, the less actual research you're doing, and it's more like the grad students who are actually doing the field work, and then they just report up to you?
Yeah, that's like a big school like a Harvard. The PIs are responsible for getting money, and everything else is done by graduate students, postdoc fellows, and visiting scholars. Now, not in our school, the small school. We occasionally have some master's graduate students, so we have to tame the ambition. Something more manageable, more doable, more focused, and could be done within a short period of time. So long-term projects are not that easy. And remember that when we don't get a lot of outstanding students like you guys.
I'm sure you still do. Now, another sort of nature versus nurture debate, but really a fake debate, because of course we know it's both with nature and nurture. In evolution, I imagine, is survival or reproduction. Now, obviously it's both, but when an animal evolves some sort of deceptive appearance or behavior, there's the question of, is it doing this for survival reasons, like in the case of poison and not getting eaten or seen by predators, or is it doing it for reproductive reason of like signaling fitness?
Oh, both. Yeah, there are tricks for survival. There are tricks for reproduction. These are sexual cheats for all over. Yeah, for reproduction. So these are the two themes, and these are survival tricks versus the reproductive tricks.
But sometimes they go in opposite directions. Like the classic example with the peacock, it's evolving these big, beautiful feathers to signal its fitness, but at the same time, it's handicapping itself. So the feathers cost a lot of energy. They make it more visible to predators and so on. And it's saying like, look at what a big handicap I have. My genes must be really excellent if I can still survive with all this baggage.
Yeah, that's I was talking about males and females during the courtship. The males choose males choose females, females choose males. But if, for example, it's just to use a stereotype, competing males versus choosing females. I mean, it's all the stereotype, but just for the simplicity of discussion. If you have 10 males around, everybody's saying, I'm the guy, I'm the guy, I'm the good one. And how can females tear them apart? They need a natural lie detector, as I was saying right, in my book. That is the honest signal. The handicap communicates exactly that. If a male is weak, the male cannot afford, sort of like, for example, peacock cannot afford a long tail. Yeah. So that is exactly, it's driven by female choice. Males have to show female they are fit, they are strong, which also means they have good genes.
So there's an optimistic and pessimistic story being told here, because thus far we've been talking about evolutionary pressures in favor of deception, and you don't want to commit some naturalistic fallacy saying like, well, lying evolves in all sorts of species, therefore lying must be good. We also see evolutionary pressures for honesty, so that's the good news. The bad news is that often honesty has to come through these costly signals.
Yes, absolutely. And this is something people often say, well, cheating is good, lying is good, greed is good. Anything can be good until it is countered by another one, alternative. For example, honesty is good when in a situation where there are lots of cheaters. And honesty is not as good when everybody is honest, because you create opportunity for cheaters to profit from it. So that is a kind of evolutionary balance. So we would see that's the way diversity is created. And I talked about that, especially for these cheat. For example, fish cheating for reproductive advantages, sort of like such as precocials in salmon. These are little male salmons that don't go to the sea to fatten up and come back as a competitive male. So they stay in the fresh water, and they are sexually mature the second year. Well, they are still tiny little fish. That big fish, they are sexually mature. You cannot imagine a salmon that big. It's already sexually mature, but it's a strategy. It's a strategy so that they can reproduce faster.
While the other ones are away, getting bigger
When
and
the other
stronger.
ones are away, and also when you migrate to the sea, it typically comes back like 5 years. And during the 5 years, lots of them die.
Mhm.
And these little ones don't have to suffer that kind of onerous migration. So they actually skip that step. So there are pros and cons. The pros is
Mhm.
that, well, lower mortality. But the cons is, well, they are so small. There's little,
Mhm.
for example, sperm to be made.
Right.
And also they often got eaten by other fish as well. So yeah, it's always a balance. We often call it, as you know, behavioral polymorphism or
Mhm.
morphological polymorphism. Polymorphism is very common in animals, and because of different approaches and strategies, you have different kinds of approaches, different behaviors. They are equally adaptive, and then that's the reason they are existing in certain proportions in a
The
population.
small salmon mating strategy reminds me of another strategy you talk about, the sneaky fucker lizards.
Oh, set the what is the rock scissor paper lizard, right?
Uh-huh.
The side botch lizards. Yes, that's right. These lizards males come in 3 types. The orange male that is super aggressive and holding a big territory. Within it, there are several females, so they defend for several females. And then you have monogamous blue males with the sort of like a blue throat, and they typically have one female. But they are far less aggressive, which also means far less cost in terms of maintenance.
Mhm.
And so they are far less aggressive, so they spend less time on energy or in fighting. And finally, you have the kind of she-male that pretended to be female and sneaking around in the orange male, which means the most aggressive male's territory, and under the nose of their territorial owner, and doing sneaking around and mating with females. So you have 3 strategies, and they are polymorphism, typical reproductive polymorphism.
I normally don't curse on this podcast, but it is the technical term for that third strategy, sneaky fucker, right?
Yeah, that's right. You can, well, she-male is also an older term.
Uh-huh.
But you can talk about these things. It should not be a problem unless we have some other meaning for that. We try to detach the kind of meaning from humans. You are right.
Uh-huh. I've told that story to several friends, especially female friends, and we've been comparing it to this similar behaviors in humans. This is where it gets a little bit psychological and more anecdotal, less scientific. But the idea is that you have some, like the orange lizards, who are very dominant. So this is the traditional alpha male. Maybe they're the quarterback at school. And then you have the other more less blue or less colorful lizards. So this would be like the nerds at school, probably like you and I were as researchers.
Yep.
and so something like the nice guys. And the idea is you don't acquire mates through the traditional strategy. So you have to do something like saying, well, in a way, like the she-male lizard technique of appealing to more feminine traits. So saying something like, I'm not like other guys. You can talk to me. We can get emotional. We can open up about our feelings, like all these things that are attractive fitness indicators, but in a very different way than the traditional sense. So again, it's sort of like a separate pathway to achieve the same desired outcome, and the desired outcome being acquiring a mate.
Yeah, different strategies. The evolutionary biologist David Buss, evolutionary psychologist, you know him, right?
Mm-hmm.
David Buss has been talking about the male and the women, men, and short-term versus long-term relationships and all these things, and using a totally 2 different sets of strategies for short-term
Mm-hmm.
relationship and for long-term relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for short-term relationships, these guys tended to be macho-looking, high testosterone, but they are not dedicated to committed to a long-term relationship.
Right.
No, prefer a one night stand, for example. The long term for males like us, people tend to see as long term really for long term relationships. Once get involved, and they would make a commitment.
To tie this into nature and nurture, you might think that it's merely an individual differences thing that's determined by genes. Like maybe some people are just more high testosterone and going to be oriented towards short-term mating no matter what. But we also know that testosterone levels go down in a committed relationship and go down even further after a male becomes a father. And that seems to be in part to inhibit that aggressive impulse and to inhibit sex drive so that the male is more oriented towards caring him for his children.
Yeah, absolutely. The one of the famous psychological studies is about married people live longer, right? You have seen that one?
Yes.
The people in the first, they thought that was a correlation, but they thought that, well, marriage will make you live longer. Yeah, you get married. Then they realized, well, yeah, there is a lot of changes, and also women choose men who tended to have a stable income, good health, intelligence, for example. And these characters will make a man live longer. It's not because of marriage. It's probably because of women's good choice.
And those are all costly signals because it's clearly a fitness indicator to be healthy, to be wealthy, to be intelligent. All of these are things that you want, but they also require a lot of discipline. So only those enough disciplined can actually exhibit that costly signal.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So there are lots of these parallels that we see between evolutionary biology and the diverse range of species that you cover into your book. And then in the later chapters, you get towards humans. We've already started discussing this a little bit, but we talk about how there's deception at the individual level, which seems to be pervasive across species. And then you mentioned that deception at the institutional level seems to be unique to humans, or at least to highly intelligent social species.
Yeah, absolutely. Because other animals don't have institutions, social institutions, but cheating on institutions, cheating on organizations, cheating on government, cheating on rules, cheating on laws, for example, and these are uniquely human.
I'm sure you're familiar with Frans de Waal's work with chimpanzees, and he has a book called Chimpanzee Culture, if I remember correctly. And chimpanzee politics, yes.
1987, yeah, 1987, yeah.
And they arrange themselves hierarchically, and they do have politics, right? It's not as complex as our own, but do you see something akin to institutional deception in chimps?
The problem is they don't have institutions, so there's no way they can do that. But their politics could be elaborate. The interesting note was that in the 1990s, when Newt Gingrich was the speaker of the House Speaker, he asked every Republican to read that book.
With the goal that it's going to understand ourselves. He was, and that's how alpha male became vernacular term, right?
Exactly. How to maneuver, how to manipulate others to be alpha. I think that was the message.
There's an interesting paradox here that on one hand, institutional deception is unique to humans, and this type of large-scale corruption is unique to humans. But on the other hand, it's not really unique at all because it's the same basic building blocks just applied at a much larger scale.
Oh yeah. Eventually, the victims are people. That's for sure. But the deception per se, or the cheating, or the lying, or cheating, and all these things per se, is not directly against the people, but they get directed against the institution. So I think that's the difference.
Now, you quote a lot of philosophers in your book, so we can get real philosophical here. There's
as long as you don't talk about Freud.
Okay. No, not philosophical, not psychological. So there's this idea of converging towards some sort of natural law of behavior, like in a game theory sense, because on one hand, even though in the rest of the animal world, nothing looks like, economics, we've created or discovered these sort of natural laws in game theory that seem to describe optimal trading strategies in a whole variety of different economic games. And you could swap out economics for something like survival if the resources are food or sex in a biological context. So the philosophical question there is, even at these higher order institutional levels, are there something like latent natural biological laws that still apply to us, but we've just yet to discover?
Oh, that's a great one. I do think lots of them will have to be discovered. Although we've been working toward that direction for quite some time, people have been using psychologists and biologists have been using these economic laws, game theories, trade-offs, benefit cost ratio, and all these things have been applied to them. So yes, we have been using that all the time, but I do believe there got to be something newer, something that have not been discovered. Recently, my lab has been working on to see whether these fish are involved in bargaining when during the competitive interactions instead of all about competition, like Darwin said. But we were thinking that potentially, they also engage in the so-called cooperative bargaining, which will benefit both of them. So it's sort of like a game theory, but it's not directly game theory yet. But we've been using that to see whether animals interact in a more sophisticated way than just a competition. Competition is all about competition.
Right.
So
and then again, to get to that conscious or unconscious question, whatever you discover there, it's bound to be amazing, because either the fish are much smarter than we realize in order to engage in complex social behavior, or they don't really have to be intelligent at all, and it's just instinctual, in which case, again, there's much more encoded in their genes than we realize.
Yeah, that's the nature and nurture part, right? Again,
Yeah.
I do believe, for example, cuckoos, when they parasitize on reed warbler, the reed warblers actually, when the parasitic ratio is high, such as like 30% of the reed warblers' nests are parasitized, the reed warblers will be careful and they will toss out all the eggs that do not look like theirs. Well, that's 30%. But when the parasitic ratio is lower, like 6%, below 6%, and these reed warblers, the host, will not toss out any of them, because otherwise you toss out the bath water or the babies. So you can see that they do have that kind of instinctive sense of probability. But do they know probability? No, definitely not. It's just a set of rule of thumb they apply according to certain situations.
You see a lot of this in neuroscience, especially on the computational end. People are arguing, even for very simple organisms, that they're doing something like a Bayesian probabilistic model, like the basic neurons are operating in this probabilistic way.
Yeah, people have been working on neurons, and some neurons are involved in that kind of assessment of the situation. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And are you a neurobiologist, right? A neuropsychologist, right? Cognitive
Yes,
psychology.
but more so on the developmental psychology end than on the actual neurobiology. Like about the deepest I go into the biology is looking at, proportion of variance explained in an age-related change by puberty and hormones. But I couldn't tell you what the hormones are actually doing on the cellular level.
Okay. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Have you heard of
coming together, biology and psychology coming together? I mean, you got to be psychologists up there, like a philosophy and biology is just toiling around on these basic things, measure
absolutely nature and nurture, the whole theme of it.
And we talk about nature, you talk about nurture all the time, but now it's nice that we come together.
Yeah, it's interesting because psychology is generally moving in a more biological direction, and it sounds like in biology, especially when we're talking about species that you normally don't think is that highly social, like and capable of cooperation, like fish, again moving a little bit towards that nurture end.
Yeah, that's right. The fish. I actually use um two fantastic examples of fish. One is the guppies.
Mhm.
Guppies when males court when a male courts on a female, and the guppies would find an ugly male to go with it. So basically taking the Ebbinghaus illusion, the effect of Ebbinghaus illusion. So
Mhm.
to make, well, if a plain looking male accompanied by an ugly looking male, and the plain looking male will look better in
Uh-huh.
comparison. That's Ebbinghaus illusion.
Right. It's like anchoring. The expectations are lowered.
Absolutely, in terms of behavioral economics, basically is psychology.
We were talking earlier about uh, parasitic behavior. Have you heard of the hypothesis of parasitic ideas in the Richard Dawkins sense of like memes can be things that are hosted by, well, in this case, humans. So like memes are ideas that can be transmitted, and evolution, cultural evolution can change them over time. So, let's say we see an internet meme and it could undergo a slight adaptation, like you edit it in some way. And in the same way with genetic mutations, most edits are probably going to make it worse, but some of them might make it more funny and that much more likely to be shared, and it propagates over time. And then, so going off of that basic idea of memes and cultural evolution, people like Gad Saad and Andy Norman have argued that there are parasitical ideas. So these are ideas that you see, they're also arguing that they are especially transmitted over social media. So over social media, words that contain angry emotional words are more likely to be transmitted. They're more likely to evoke a reaction, and then people will share it. They'll retweet it, not necessarily because they like it, but just because, it's so frustrating and you want to share it just to evoke a reaction and get other people to empathize with your emotional reaction of like, look how terrible this is. We should all uh, collectively protest it. So that would be an example of a parasitical idea, right? It's successfully propagating itself at the cost of its host.
Oh, that's absolutely. Is disinformation mainly that kind of parasitic idea?
I,
Disinformation.
disinformation is probably I guess you would frame it as like an unfortunate consequence of it, because
Okay.
the natural baseline truth would be something like an idea is parasitical if it's harmful to its host, or if it undergoes changes that benefit the idea in the sense of propagating itself at harm to its host. And then it probably just so happens that the more something is likely to outrage you, the more likely it is to be exaggerated, untrue. And then that's like the indirect pathway towards misinformation.
Yeah, I think that's all possible. I mean, you look at the disinformation. Some of the ideas are so contagious and quickly, and they utilize people's the confirmation bias. So some of the ideas spread very quickly, and not
Mhm.
necessarily has the or any of them has the obvious cost immediately. So people may not feel it, but then you look back on it's pretty pretty bad. And I look at these COVID data in terms of the anti-vax folks. I mean, you look at the anti-vax folks, and many of them still believe that. But you look at the data, then you see that the people, in comparison, those people with two shots of any of the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine, they act and in comparison with same age people without any shots, those who are not vaccinated suffered 14 times higher of mortality. But yeah, I mean, this anti-vax idea is highly contagious. But in the end, is those folks that suffer. But not necessarily, I mean, for everybody. But statistics never lie.
So that would be a classic example of a parasitical idea because it's propagating itself at harm to its host. Do you know of any of the evolutionary psychology research on disgust sensitivity?
Disgust sensitivity.
So the idea is that certain beliefs, and I think
Paul Rosen's idea, right? Paul Rosen's idea from University of Pittsburgh, right?
I'm not sure of the source. I'll fully describe it and let me know if we're talking about the same thing. So it does make sense, however wrong it is when looking at it from an objective, data-driven perspective, that if you have a physiological trait like disgust sensitivity, there's natural individual variability there. Some are more disgust sensitive than others. And what a vaccine is literally injecting your body with a foreign substance, a virus. So no wonder some people are gonna be disgusted by that or extremely emotionally reactive to that. And, obviously you need the scientific mindset to take the next step forward and say, okay, a little bit of virus now means a lot less of virus later. So it's a good thing in the long run. But if you're looking at it dispassionately from like an evolutionary perspective, it makes sense that there would be a small subset of the population that wouldn't be open to such a thing.
Yeah, that's absolutely. That's the what is the behavioral economists have been saying that our society is so complex. It's our intuitive feeling often fail us, and you really have to look at the data instead of rely on your own feeling, which basically, especially like a small probability events, we don't have any idea. We recognize sharks, for example, as the dangerous animal. We did not realize that, well, the most dangerous animals are mosquitoes that kill over 1 million people. In fact, so many people with malaria and killing at least 1 million people a year. I mean, sharks, maybe how many? 10, a dozen people?
Yeah, I did a podcast with Steven Pinker a few months ago, a great psychologist. He wrote a book recently called Rationality, and he talks about all of these different cognitive biases. Like, as you mentioned, not people being more afraid of sharks than mosquitoes, even though the data shows us that mosquitoes are far more dangerous.
That's right. We don't have sense of how dangerous mosquitoes are. So that's something we somehow we have not evolved. But mosquitoes live with humans for so long. I mean, why do we still don't have the sense of being afraid of them? Because the disgust level, maybe when a person is torn apart by sharks, that was disgusting, right? The people are scared. But when you got bite by mosquito, the chance of infection may be low, maybe.
Yeah, I bet there's some neuropsychology of associative learning going on there because our brains are very good at pairing direct threat with direct context of that threat. But with something like a mosquito, it bites you. Maybe you realize, maybe you don't. But even if you realize, you get sick days or weeks later. There's nothing that's directly making the connection. Whereas as you're getting bitten by a shark, you immediately know what is causing you harm.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. Also rare, but the consequences are obvious.
Yeah, and then that information would spread. So it's much harder to tell a story that sticks unless you're trained scientifically to understand how disease spreads by mosquitoes. And so all of that points at the pessimistic end of the information age because we can transmit information, true or false, very rapidly. And things like social media allow for false information to be transmitted at higher rates than before, and it allows for these sorts of echo chambers where people who normally might be a single crazy person in a village out of 100 can now get together with enough of them across the world and think that it's a greater consensus than it actually is. So that's the harm. On the optimistic side, though, we also have something like wisdom of the crowd taking over on social media.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are living in a totally new world, and the selection forces are different now.
Mhm.
But I do believe that the senior citizens are the most vulnerable group of people because of their declining cognitive capacity. And
Mhm.
otherwise, they could recognize some of the apparent obvious um, scams, but because of their declining cognitive system, and they may fail to recognize.
Oh,
And
this is a nature nurture question as well, because it sounds like you're describing more of a natural explanation, which is to say, with age, you have a decline in certain cognitive faculties, which is certainly true. So again, it's not going to be an either or thing. But the first thing I thought was nothing about age-related changes in cognition, but I was thinking like, oh, just the older populations weren't raised around the internet like I was, so they're not aware how pervasive scams are.
oh,
That would be more of a nurture explanation.
yeah, that's another aspect. Yes, definitely.
And
Yeah.
we were talking about at the beginning, it's not about which is which, it's about which one explains more of the variance. Which of these effects do you think it would be driving it?
I think it's both.
Mhm.
But as for example, 20 years down the line, I mean probably we grow up along the internet availability. But 20 years down the line, and still, I still believe that the older folks will still be more vulnerable. And I mean, the scammers will target older folks. It's just more, it's easier. And also older folks tend to be
Mhm.
established and they have more resources as well. So it's more profitable for scammers.
And another unique area is that's evolutionarily ancient, which is mate selection, but has completely changed in the modern world with online dating, as well as online dating. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you've thought or written about how deception plays a role there as well.
Yeah. Men tend to exaggerate a few more inches taller
Uh-huh.
in online on average, but there are people who are more honest than others. Women tend to exaggerate their body weight by like 16 pounds less.
Lighter. Uh-huh.
Yeah, these are the kind of some snapshots of I mean, lying. These are not even deception. These are lying, outright lying. But
Right.
there are others. Yeah.
And this is something I've never understood. I know that I'm the psychologist, but I want to spin it to you. So because you would think that there's no point because let's say you lie and you attract the mate and then they realize you lied and they're like, oh, well, I was conditionally interested on you and now I'm no longer interested. So you just wasted everyone's time. And you would think that enough of that would mean the lying just stops because it's not effective, but it
Mhm.
must continue because it's effective. So then the question is it effective to the sense that people are hoping maybe I'll lie now and it'll get my foot in the door, but then once I get my foot in the door, they'll like me enough for other reasons that I can stick around.
That's exactly the situation. You need the chance first. If you do not lie, for example, like me, I'm only 5'7". I mean, if I were in my 20s, I really desperately need a girlfriend, for example. But I said, well, I'm 5'7", 5'7", and very few people would even click my profile. Not to mention that they will send me
Uh-huh.
an inquiry or something. I never get a chance. If I say, well, I'm 5'9", and then get one foot into it, and then see what would happen.
And then, so then you say, um, once they like you, then you apologize and tell the truth. This happened with my parents, and I know my mom is listening. So hi. That when they met, my mom was 29, my dad was 48, but he lied and said he was 38 to minimize that age gap. And then it was only once she already fell in love that he's like, actually, I'm 10 years older than I said I was. He didn't have any gray hair at the time, though, so I guess he was able to pull it off.
Yeah, I can dye my hair, for example.
Uh-huh. Now, there's
Yeah,
a culture of accepting that or making it more likely. So, for example, I'm 6 feet tall, even, and oftentimes I'll meet guys who are 6 feet tall, allegedly, and I'm taller than them. So what this is clearly they're like 5'11 and they're exaggerating just a little bit. And earlier in my life, what would happen is I would say, no, you're not. And they would try to convince me that I'm in fact taller than I thought I was. And now I just go with it. Now I say I'm 6'1" because everyone else who's 6 foot tall, allegedly, is a little bit an inch shorter than me. So it's created this interesting pressure where even though I'm at the threshold at which people are generally lying about, it it forces me to lie as well, just to map onto everyone's other else's expectation of what 6 feet tall looks like.
Mhm. Well, that's absolutely. I mean, our society is so open and so dynamic that we really don't have time to know each other. Unlike for example, when I was little and I was living in a small village, and everybody knew everybody else, so you cannot hide from me whatever. But nowadays, people like Tinder, for example, it's just your profile. Who knows who you are, right? And even politically, for example, people voted for tall men, for example, and that was the reason. Nowadays, 80% of these candidates, presidential candidates, have been won by the taller one since the beginning of last century, maybe because of especially because of the TV coverage that was starting from JFK's time. And I mean, the short candidate was just not possible to win nowadays. So yeah.
You don't want to say correlation is causation. You don't want to say being tall makes you win, but there might be these indirect pathways of like, if you're taller, you're more confident or you appear more dominant, and all these things indirectly lead to that increased chance of winning.
Absolutely. That was Stone Age cognitive instinct, right? Stone Age, the tall man tended to be stronger, tended to be, maybe better at the hunting, better at getting food. Tall men were stronger. In Stone Age, and we still have that impression there, so that many people don't cast on policies; they just cast on impression, cast their votes on impression. That was the reason a few years ago, during 2015, the last round of competition. What is the Florida guy? What is his name? He's the Florida senator.
Ron DeSantis.
No, he's the governor.
Oh, I don't know that.
I suddenly forgot when he was debating on Trump and during the Republican primary, he was debating with Trump. He's still the senator from Florida. I forgot his name. Suddenly just slipped away. But he was wearing a high heel in debate because he was 5'9". He was average size, but in comparison, he was shorter than Trump. But so he wore a high heel, like a 2-inch high heel, to the debate, and then it was noticed by the Trump campaign group, and they made a joke of that.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing with shorter Hollywood actors.
Marco, what is his name?
Rubio?
Marco? Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, they do the same thing in Hollywood. I don't remember which actor was shorter than I expected, but I remember seeing that there was some movie where I think it was in The Greatest Showman, Zac Efron is a male lead and he's like 5'9", and Zendaya, the female lead, is also like 5'9" or 5'10". They wanted him to be taller, so he had the same types of shoes on in the movie.
I see. Yeah, it's just everywhere. Nowadays, that's impossible for John Adams, who was 5'7", and Madison, James Madison, to be elected. That's not possible. Madison was only like a 5'4".
Oh, wow.
5'3" or 5'4". Yeah, just nowadays, just impossible for them to be elected because of video, the TV live coverage.
Oh, that was closer to average 200 or 300 years ago, wasn't it? Because we've had all sorts of changes in diet since industrialization.
Yeah, Adams was probably average. John Adams was average, but Madison was clearly shorter.
Have you looked into any of the data from dating apps like Tinder?
No, I have not. There was a few years ago. I looked at how some of the information is exaggerated. The
I
bodies.
think you would be fascinated in doing so as an evolutionary biologist because it exactly matches what you would predict by all the classic theories of sexual selection. So for one thing, there are far more men than women who go on these dating apps to begin with, which makes sense because men seems to generally be the ones seeking out more sex, especially on Tinder. So on Tinder, which is known as more of a hookup app as opposed to like a date and find a long-term partner app, it's far more skewed towards men. And on other dating apps that are more geared towards like serious relationships, I believe the sex ratio is more balanced. And on Tinder, which is known to be a hookup app, you also see much more of a disparity, like a Pareto distribution of who gets the likes. So it's something like the top 10% of users get 90% of the likes. And not only that, another interesting sex difference you find is that the average woman rates the average man as below average attractiveness, and the average man rates the average woman as above average attractiveness. And that seems to be a result of that sex ratio disparity, where it's like because women are relatively scarce, the average woman seems above average. And because men are relatively abundant, the average man, just statistically, seems below average.
No, absolutely. That's the economic theory, right? Scarcity drives up the price. Drives the price. Yeah, absolutely. And I would like to add a little bit. Ashley Madison, for example, the company for for cheating for the married couples dating, and in their database, overwhelmingly, men are the overwhelming more common than women. So the way they try to satisfy these demand would they created kind of bots to reply to men. So
fake woman bots
fake
to make
women
the men
bots.
more interested or more likely to not quit the app or to pay for the premium subscription.
Absolutely. So it's basically
Wow. And
they
now we
try
have
they try to
AI
cheat them. They
chat
got
like
cheated as well.
GPT-3, GPT-4 that could make those bots even better. And you could really think
Wow.
you're
Yeah. I
interacting with
mean,
a real human.
in the future, and this yeah, the GPT 4.0 now even more look human. Yeah, I mean, the potential is limitless nowadays. It looks like,
I
especially
was at a psych talk recently. It was somewhat of a doomsdaying talk. Often a lot of psychology research, especially social psychology, which is widely survey based, uses websites like Amazon, MTurk, which allows you to recruit people. And there's already been a problem of, if you're studying something like political beliefs in America, you want American subjects, and there's already been a problem of, and you get paid for the survey. So there are people who set up like bot farms of people from like China or India taking the surveys just to earn money and pretending to be American. That's been a problem for a while. And what this talk was saying is that now with things like GPT-4, you don't even need people farms to do that. You can just get bots to do it and create fake AI generated text. And the prediction was all psychology research that's going to be using those online surveys, it's probably going to go away in the next few years as bots take over. So we're going to need to go back to in-person studies.
with a paper and pencil, right?
Right.
Going back. Yeah, yeah. That's a new trend. Absolutely. We don't know what will happen. And I have telling my students, if we use AI to write your term paper, they are considered to be plagiarism. Yeah.
There's a big debate about that, especially with AI generated art, because the art is on one hand unique and novel. So you could say that the one who creates the prompt is the one who generated it. On the other hand, you could say that the AI created it using training data from other artists. So especially if you give it a prompt to say like create something in the style of another artist, to what extent is that plagiarizing the other artist?
Wow. Yeah. That's now the cheating at a higher level.
To return it to your book, that's a nice roundabout way of you argue that deception in all sorts of ways has led to creative advancements in like artistic advancement and intelligence and culture, both in humans and other animals.
Yeah, absolutely. And cheating and anti-cheating got locked up as arms race, and so it go on, and you have more and more new things coming out.
Intelligence is fairly straightforward to me, because if someone is lying, the more socially intelligent you are, the more you can pick up on contextual cues that can signal that they're being dishonest, and then you can recognize that and you can adjust your behavior accordingly. But how is it for things like artistic and creative achievement? Where does deception come into play there?
In all art is about deceiving our vision. For example, I use the example of Rembrandt, for example. Rembrandt is really good at painting the light. The way he does it to fool our eyes is by making everywhere else dark. Well, emphasize a certain spot, and that is a fire or light. So in my book, I use what is the philosopher or what? A meditation. That is one of his famous paintings. And just you look at the light coming through the window, it's just so bright. I mean, this is basically using our deception, what is the viewer's sort of cognitive distortion.
Right.
Do you call it distortion? Cognitive distortion when contrasted with something, or illusion when contrasted with something really dark, these light spots really shows up.
Right. And this is deception as opposed to lying, because the painting in truth is what it is, but it's exploiting sensory biases that we have that make us think it's something else.
Absolutely. And Escher, for example, Escher always draw things that looks like ridiculous in reality, but it's an artistic deception.
Oh, I don't know if you're familiar with this. There have been theoretical arguments that in primates, including humans, our vision was adapted. There was like an evolutionary arms race between snakes and primates. And the hypothesis is that in areas where primates, our early ancestors, were heavily predated on by snakes, human vision evolved to get better. So the primates that had better vision could avoid the snakes more, and over millions of years, we get better vision. And there were a series of studies, or maybe even meta-analyses, done across a whole bunch of different countries and populations and species, and there was a general pretty robust correlation between the prevalence of snakes and how acute the vision of different primate species are across the world.
You think that's the way? I don't know about that specific one, but to me, I've been thinking that, well, it is a vision related to our bipedal walking.
I've heard that argument as well. I'm not as familiar with.
Yeah, once you have bipedal walking, your nose is well off the ground. So unlike a dog sniff around all the time, when you have bipedal walking, and basically you are standing high and really favoring the visual evolution, the sharp vision, being far, seeing sharper. I mean, this is probably the most convincing, easier thing to relate with. But I'm not sure as to the snakes. If we evolved from Africa, I mean, if we evolved from, say we have evolved from 1 million years ago, I would not say 200,000 years ago. That only refers to the mitochondrial DNA. It's just one kind of DNA. There are so many kind of DNA around us. It's a combination of that. The people have this misunderstanding that, well, humans only evolved like 200,000 years ago. No. We are going way back. So say a few million years ago. And we don't know the snake distribution, for example. I mean, it's hard to argue.
Yeah, and this wasn't even just in humans or even just in apes. It was across primate species across the world at a population level. The idea is monkeys that live in areas where there are higher populations of snake in general have better vision than monkeys where there are no snakes. And I don't know how large the effect size is, so it's by no means saying that this is the only explanation. But it was interesting to me that this seems, the better vision, if that finding is true, seems to be like a counter deception strategy, or a strategy for better detecting deception, because snakes like to hide.
Okay. You have to look at in Australia. Australia has the high most poisonous snakes there.
So the hypothesis then would be that the best vision would be in Australia.
Yeah, so whatever you would think about kangaroos and and the koalas and all these marsupials, and they should have a higher cognitive system, even better than anywhere else. If the snake venom actually drives the evolution of vision, I don't see that pattern, but it's just possible.
Now, bipedalism would explain our increased clarity in vision, but it wouldn't necessarily say anything about color vision. And I'm wondering your thoughts, or if you know the data on how humans evolved better color vision than most, because I was watching a great David Attenborough documentary called Life in Color, and they did a really cool thing showing, one thing they showed is a tiger in the jungle and saying, like, why would a tiger evolve to be orange against a green backdrop? It makes no sense. It sticks out like a sore thumb. And they were saying, only for humans does it stick out as a sore thumb, because we have 3 color receptor cones, but most of the prey that the tigers are hunting have only 2. So to them, orange looks like green. And then they put a filter on the camera and they showed the tiger blending in, and suddenly the orange and black stripes were more like green and black, and it blended in very, very excellent. And it was much more difficult to tell. And then I could see how the stripes actually were serving as camouflage.
Yeah, in lizards, there are 4. Lizards and birds as well, but birds are reptiles anyway. Birds have more, some of them have more, but at least 4. And the humans have 3 and 3 cones, and so as the most old world monkeys and apes. But in New World, typically they have 2. The prevailing theory about that is that the color vision, probably especially in the sexual dimorphic color vision, is often related to seeing fruits, the red, orange, and particularly sensitive, especially for females. So some of the species evolved the kind of sort of like mandrills and watari in South America, and these species have the really bright facial features so as to get females closer and make females interested in it. Basically, it's what is sensory exploitation theory, that when you have red, and the red is sensitive to female vision, and females at least get near, sort of like get a foot into it. That's the kind of dating thing. So get you close, and then there's something else. So I think that's one of the hypothesized evolutionary pathways for the color evolution, and also why males develop some kind of colorful features in their body.
I know in your book you've talked about similar studies with birds. Do you know if there have been any studies in monkeys where you paint the monkey red or a certain color to look as though it has the fertile butt in the case of like a female in estrus, or does that then excite the males even if it's just fake red paint?
I have not seen any. Lots of them in birds. Yeah, birds you can manipulate. I don't know why, but probably it's harder to manipulate in monkeys. I have not seen any, but probably there are.
Because you would think there's a whole continuum of how gullible you are there, because for humans, well, I guess we have makeup, so maybe not. Maybe it does still work. Makeup can fool you into someone thinking someone's more attractive.
Yeah. The makeups are typically done by women, but in some Asian countries such as South Korea and China, in some of the highly competitive cities, men do makeup with as well. But it's rare. But in women, it's makeup in especially Western countries or developed countries. It's more often. Basically, the one most important goal of making up is to make you look younger. Yeah, so that's, as evolutionary psychologists have been saying, basically it's the most valuable commodity to be younger for women.
Now, for men, this might relate to the costly signaling, handicapping idea, because men typically don't wear makeup, And you could say that why not? That's an easy way to make yourself look more attractive. But what is typically seen as attractive for men is muscularity. And there's no way to fake that, right? You have to do the hard work of exercising a lot and eating right
You go to the
to gain
gym.
muscle.
You go to the gym to do that.
Yeah, exactly. So that's contrary to makeup, which you might view as something like in this deception sense, you can easily fake. This is more like that costly fitness indicator that shows that someone has put in the necessary work.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have to put some work into it. Oh, some of the what is the shoulder pad, for example, is also a fake signal, so as to make you look like with a wider shoulder, so as more to be more attractive. And these designs, yeah, also indicate that as well.
It does make you look more dominant. Maybe that's why politicians are always in suits.
Yeah, like Marco Rubio, right? Wearing the high heel boots.
Yeah. Lixing, there's one last agenda item for me. This is the idea of luxury beliefs by Rob Henderson. I sent you a couple articles. Were you able to take a look at those?
Oh, yeah, that one. One of the articles is more convincing than the other. I mean, the rich people try to create some kind of subculture that is not try to exclude others, those who cannot afford, for example. I do agree with the one of the what you gave me two. The one is from a New York Post, right? That one is less convincing than the other one. The other one is more convincing. I believe that originated from conspicuous consumption, and then weave around a culture that is not affordable for people who cannot afford. Yeah, so I think that is the way he has been saying.
So for our listeners, there was a podcast a couple months ago with Rob Henderson, who's a social psychologist, and he applies evolutionary themes to his work, and he talks a lot about status and dating. And the idea is there are some costly status indicators, like you can wear an expensive watch or nice clothes or things that only if you can afford it can you have this fitness indicator. So that's going to be attractive to people. But he's uniquely known for arguing for these luxury belief ideas. Now, luxury belief, he's saying, is it's not a physical item or something about your appearance that signals status. It's an idea that you hold, but it's luxury in the sense that there are certain ideas that you only get exposed to in certain high-class circles. But it gets even more complicated than that, because you might think, you and I wish this were the case, Lixing, that the more educated you are in the academic sense, the more science you know. Those could be luxury beliefs that would be sexy. But for some reason, no one really sees listing off a bunch of formulas as sexy. But then there are other luxury beliefs, like just subtle knowledge about, how should you eat properly? Like if you're given multiple pieces of silverware at a fancy dinner, like which is the right one to use? These little subtle forms of cultural knowledge that signal status.
Well, that's certainly true. I mean, you have you grew up, for example, you grew up from a rich family. I grew up from a poor family, and the way we talk with each other, we use different language, right? With different vocabulary, for example, even different wording, words and probably you would recognize my language as rude, and your language is highbrow, for example. Yeah, I mean, this is I would say, instead of creating that kind of different culture, but I think it's basically you grew up with that and you take it for granted, and then people recognize as different. Is that the case?
Well,
I'm not sure whether
it's certainly been a bit of a jump to me, because we grew up in different cultures, so that there may have still been a wealth gap, but at least within the United States, in the time that I was being raised 10, 20 years ago, I wasn't wealthy, and coming into these fancy private schools where there's a very different culture, that was a new thing to me. So Rob and I talk about this on the podcast, because he came from an untraditional background and then into these prestigious universities as well. And we talk about the culture shift there and how that generated his hypotheses of looking into luxury beliefs and status.
Yeah, he was talking about that he grew up from a poor family, then went to the military and came back and somehow got into Yale University, right?
Yes.
And then he found that he did not fit in because people speak and talk in a very different way and quite different from where he grew up with. I mean, so yeah, it's absolutely. I think anything, language, of course, can create a barrier in many different ways.
You see these same interesting mating dynamics. I don't know how well this would generalize to other species, but in humans, we have culture. And one thing you notice is that when you have a status indicator, something like going to Harvard or Yale, on dating apps or just in the real world, you get more attention from people. Like let's say you're on the dating market, people are looking for that, but you don't get it within that bubble because, you know, Harvard students are dating other Harvard students and they're not going to be impressed because they go there. So it sort of cancels out. But then as soon as you leave that bubble, then it starts to act as this outside filter. And I'm wondering if in other species you have that too, where there are some status or fitness indicators where maybe within a narrow circle where everyone has that traits, they don't apply. But then if you generalize outwards, then it can be attractive to like different populations.
So you behave like a Harvard and you attract to, for example, some small school people.
I don't know what it means to behave like Harvard. I think I just behave like me, but then people place the label on you, right? And then you get treated differently regardless.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, I agree. Yeah. And I mean, I've seen people like that. And the people pretend to be, they have a better than you in a kind of background. And
Now, is that unique to humans, or is there any form of doing that in animals? I guess this would be something like, is it possible for animals to be arrogant, or do you have to be self-conscious to be arrogant first?
Look at the monkeys, it's absolutely likely. But you know, sometimes often when you don't see, it's because you are not specifically looking for that. So once you focus on that, sometimes you see differences.
We could disentangle dominance from arrogance here, because other primates can certainly be dominant, and that'll look like arrogant behavior in humans. But in humans, you might call that just dominant if it's in fact dominant. Arrogant seems to be something like you're acting too dominant for your own good, or too dominant than you actually deserve to. So you're exaggerating your status. You're engaging in lying in the technical sense, as you outline in your book.
Yeah, in a way, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about my monkeys and chimpanzees as well. They all have their personalities. Some of them are more aloof, others are more friendly, but basically they try to, go higher in terms of social rank. The different approaches for the same purpose. Yeah, so the different personalities. The personalities, well, yeah, as psychologists, you know a lot, right? The personalities are basically is a set of basic rules. In terms of behavioral approach, and approach to things in the different ways. Yeah,
we've covered so much territory here: deception and lying.
We could go on forever.
From insects to fish to primates to humans.
Yeah.
Lixing, thank you very much for your time. Listeners, be sure to check out the nature of lying, the liars of nature and the nature of liars.
You're a tongue twister.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Adam. It's nice
to
talk with you.